business. Suitability of city-owned spaces to be used as warming centers and extreme weather response shelters. Director of Planning Services.
Good afternoon, Council. So the report before you is to provide information on the suitability of city-owned spaces to be used as warming centers and emergency weather response shelters. Going back a couple of years ago, October 17, 2023, following a delegation from LIFT Community Services regarding the 2023 COTW Region Homeless Count, Committee of the Whole resolved that staff be directed to report back on the suitability options of city spaces as warming center and emergency weather response shelter. Then jumping forward to this year, April 1st, following a delegation from the COTW Coalition to End Homelessness regarding the closure of the emergency shelter on Joyce Avenue, Committee of the Whole resolved that staff report back on options for both hot and cold extreme weather response plan for the 2025-2026 for unhoused population. So today's report focuses specifically on the October 17th, 2023 Council resolution, and staff acknowledge and commit to addressing the Council direction received on April 1st of this year when there's more staff capacity to do so. At this point, more work needs to be completed prior to reporting back on to Council on options for the development of an extreme weather response plan that considers both hot and cold scenarios. So speaking about extreme weather responses, there are three types: warming centers. An emergency warming center is a warming space with no overnight accommodation. Warming centers are not funded or managed through BC Housing. The Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness supports the eligible reimbursement to communities. The second type is a temporary winter shelter, and that is a BC Housing program that helps providers deliver temporary community-based shelter services. Temporary winter shelters operate as a seasonal shelter during colder months. And then the third type is the Extreme Weather Response Program. This is managed by BC Housing, and it is an annual winter weather-related emergency program intended to fund time-limited temporary overnight shelter spaces during periods of extreme winter weather. Under the program, which runs from October 15th to April 15th, an extreme weather response shelter may only be activated when an extreme weather alert is issued by the community representative until such time as the alert is cancelled and withdrawn. So as the delegated community representative, LIFT is leading the development and proposal of the local extreme weather response plan for the 2025-2026 winter season. Executive Director Kim Markell confirms that LIFT has been pre-approved by BC Housing to operate an extreme weather response shelter, but has yet to secure a suitable location and has reached out to the city for support. To address the October 17th, 2023 Council direction that staff report back on suitable city-owned spaces to use as warming centers and emergency weather response shelters, Planning Services staff spoke with Kim Markell, who indicated that the space and amenity requirements to operate the extreme weather response shelter would include controlled access to a minimum of 2 bathrooms, controlled access to outdoor space, and indoor storage for 20 cots and storage for those cots. So with these parameters, Planning Services staff then engaged other departments who are more familiar with the city's buildings. At LIFT's request, a key location that was explored was the city's recreation complex. And while the building has separate meeting rooms that are able to accommodate the space of 20 cots, there are other challenges making the facility not a viable option as an extreme weather response shelter. Among those challenges cited by the Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture was the need for additional staffing to close and secure the rest of the building. The complex was not built to be locked down in a traditional sense and would require staff to be there throughout the evening to manually secure the building to limit access beyond areas that would be utilized for the extreme weather response shelter. Also suggested as a possible location by LIFT was council chambers. Upon review, similar reservations exist on account of its existing use, function, and security considerations. As for the remaining city-owned facilities, most have similar challenges as those of the recreation complex or council chambers, or they're too small and or don't have the necessary amenity requirements to operate the extreme weather response shelter, or located in residential neighborhoods and further away from centrally located services. So other areas where the city has been working towards longer-term partner solutions that would support better response to extreme weather, winter weather, include the development of a temporary 40-bed year-round emergency shelter at 7104 Barnett. This is anticipated to be operational by the end of February this next year, and work being undertaken to forward the establishment of a 40-bed permanent supportive housing and 20-bed shelter facility at a location along Joyce Avenue, immediately adjacent to Cathett General Hospital. And so for both projects, the city's role is to provide the land. Other partners are responsible for securing the funding to construct and operate these facilities. More immediately, in 2025, following the closure of the year-round emergency shelter, Cathett Coalition to End Homelessness approached the city and requested the use of a city-owned facility to host temporary evening drop-in services. Council directed staff to enter into a license of occupation with the Cathett Coalition to End Homelessness for a facility located at 7156 Duncan Street. The intent was to respond quickly and address the gap in services while longer-term solutions are being explored and implemented. The license permits the space to be open from 6 p.m. to midnight, 7 days a week, and the permit expires February of next year, the end of February, February 28th. You know, one of the considerations that staff has been at least exploring is whether the hours that are currently permitted could be extended to allow that warming center to be open throughout the evening until the early hours of the morning. That is just one option. But I think I'm going to leave my presentation there, and I'm sure you have lots of questions.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of ways emergency shelters are funded, some through BC Housing and some through the emergency response. The legislation indicating that governments should have a plan for emergency cold all adds up to we are kind of not in, we don't have a plan and we don't know when to trigger which mechanisms or where to do those things. So how do we, what is our responsibility, and are we planning to figure out a way to meet that? Second question is, did we consider Dwight Hall as an emergency shelter?
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott. Why don't I start with the other buildings that were considered? So yeah, Dwight Hall, the Wildwood Fire Hall, and sorry, I'm gapping on the third building that we explored. Were all buildings that we looked at, and again, Dwight Hall and Wildwood being not centrally located, were a question for staff as to whether they would be feasible. But both those facilities do have washrooms and a space capable of accommodating the 20 beds that Lyft said that they would be interested in having. So again, those are questions for council to consider. It wouldn't be staff's recommendation, but that's not what we're here today to do. We're talking about the suitability, and I'd say those being outside of the core area of services are were not deemed as high priority. But to your first question, in part of the review, staff did find many examples of communities that don't have plans. I think it's ideally a community has a plan, and then as I spoke to in the report, staff commit to, you know, with added capacity, bringing back a plan that speaks to cold and hot weather as directed by council April 1st of this year.
So, Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Seeing as I have an emergency background, I was considering other options that I'm aware of as well, because we have used different things over the But there have been other facilities utilized in previous years, either as shelter or emergency weather shelter. And it's very sad that the Community Resource Center was closed down and the facility beside it, but there have been no answers found since then. That was this spring. There are other, like the Coalition to End Homelessness has provided an amazing service, volunteer in this community, and probably stress themselves to the max to do that, those volunteers that are contributing. There are all sorts of other volunteer and charity organizations in this community that are listed and that are supported to the tune of well over $500,000 by the taxpayers of this community and listed on page 17 of the annual report for last year, which is available if searched annual report through our city's website at powellriver.ca. So I'm really hoping that some people in our community are really thinking, and I'm really hoping there will be some soul searching right now, because we have come to what's essentially a potential emergency situation. Very fortunately, we haven't seen real cold yet. However, there are people outside. So I appreciate the mention of the facility on Duncan that could possibly be extended, but I finally came to wondering if tents could be used with potentially heating inside, and is there a location? Has this been thought of by the a tent or tents? I mean, not small tents, but something larger that could accommodate a number of people with heating. And I don't know, the fire department would probably have some opinion about that as well, but has that been considered? Because I think there is probably a tent available of suitable size in this community.
Through the chair to Councillor Southcott, on the periphery. So I think there's been some email exchanges going back and forth about the availability of tents, but it hasn't been the exploration that we have put into other buildings or facilities that are owned by the city.
Is that something conceivable that could be used? I mean, in an extreme lack of other possibilities.
From my perspective, if you're getting at questions about, for example, zoning and other things, I think that we have the ability, especially where it's a stopgap measure, we're talking about a temporary structure, that we would have the ability to employ that aspect of the zoning bylaw to address any concerns related to permitted uses on specifically zoned properties.
We're getting around to temporary use permit, et cetera. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Lord Palm.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for your report. Very thorough. And it outlines that last year during the winter season that LIFT did not operate the extreme weather emergency shelter, the coalition homeless that task, and they were in the library in a room that is now leased out or rented, so that's not available. We are very fortunate up until now that the weather has been balmy and not below zero, but next week it's forecast to get down below zero. So we're kind of at crunch time and we need to find something suitable. I'm not sure of how many people we're accommodate, but this says 20 cots. So my first question, which I have two, first question is the coalition presently operates the building up by the yard on limited hours. Now, is that building large enough to put 20 cots in, and could it be operated throughout the night with additional staffing?
Through the chair to Councillor Palm, the building's not large enough. It is has a very small footprint.
So that will not be suitable. How about one other option, which is any of the buildings up and where the barracks across from the track are located? Are any of those buildings vacant?
Through the chair to Councillor Palm, so there is one building up there that is vacant. It's understood to be in a state of disrepair and full of mold, and very likely not suitable in terms of space. And I think it has one washroom as opposed to the two.
You know, 2 washrooms, not 1, correct?
And a building not full of mold. But
so I don't know what the options are, but I'm sure hoping the community will step forward and provide some direction for these poor souls. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had a bunch of phone conversations today trying to work my head around what could be possible here. And one thing that was not mentioned in the report was that the coalition did offer a warming center above the public library, but also the United Church offered space 2 nights a week on the weekends. And so both were partners to making it possible. So thank the United Church for that. And so we're in a space time this year where no community partners with space have been stepped up, and I want to echo Councillor Southcott's frustration with groups in town offered substantial tax reduction in order because they provide community benefit, who are zoned appropriately for this purpose and who aren't stepping up. It's not in my nature to use shame as a communication tactic, but I feel like it's in the core mission of many community groups, especially the faith community, to step up in times of emergent need like this. And it is, I'm frustrated that we're in a situation of the city being like a place of last resort. So quite frustrated. Now, in conversations with the coalition, it's clear the coalition have been sharing meals every night, except some Mondays recently since April of this year, and are doing amazing work and also are at their capacity in terms of what volunteers can provide. I thank them for their service, but they are not able to offer more. In conversations with Lyft earlier today, they are also focusing on staffing up the incoming shelter in a good way and wanting to make sure that they are able to hire and recruit the right people in order to manage that site in a good way, and are also, while this would have been ideal to be able to secure earlier this year, I think because of their while we often default to them to serve this part of the community, they have a number of responsibilities in this area, one of them being opening up the shelter, the upcoming shelter in a good way. And so their capacity is also stretched. The only path that I see forward with the city's involvement is to activate city space for a warming center. And that is not something that a community partner can go to BC Housing for. That's something that the city has to do, and they can contract nonprofit agencies to operate that. But it's something that has to come from the city. It's not something that Lyft or a coalition to work with BC Housing on. It's separate from that. It's the other agency. So, in listening tonight and going through my conversations that I've had earlier today, I've been working on a motion, and it's still in draft form. And so I'm happy to hear from any other folks who have views on this issue. But so far, the only path that I see forward is city space and city resources to open a warming center, contracting community partners. I do want to remind folks that we're not looking to have a space to operate a shelter or warming center for the rest of the winter. It's when certain criteria are met. And so last year was a bit of an anomaly. I think the warming center was open for 12 nights in a row, perhaps, and I volunteered at a number of those. And and we're looking at, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. is something that is offered in other communities. And so generally outside of the time that the public is using city spaces, I acknowledge that depending on which site we're looking at, staff and security may be necessary, and that there are existing uses that some of these facilities have, but that in case of an emergency, it's worth it to set aside existing practice for the 5 to 10 nights that this might likely be used over the next few months. Unfortunately, I also want to acknowledge that whatever happens, whatever we do tonight, whether we vote on something or not, it will still need to go to council. And also, it takes time to get anything up. It's not a matter of just opening doors and things working out. We're dealing with provincial government agencies. It's just an untenable situation. I think my intention with the motion back in April about having a plan was to not be in this situation. I think this is the third year in a row where we've had December conversations about this topic. And so it's challenging. The city staff are at capacity, Lift's at capacity, Coalition's at capacity, and there aren't other groups in the community who are stepping forward. So anyways, that's where I'm at. I'm drafting out a motion right now, and happy to hear from others as I finish it up, or if we're done conversation, I can read it out. But anyways, that's the sum of my comments. Thank you, Chair.
And also, first-time speakers. I see your hand as a second-time speaker. Your first-time speakers. Oh, so I'm going to chime in and say a few things. So, first off, I'm not blaming anybody, but as Councillor Isaacson and Councillor Southcott have said, I'm disappointed that the community could not come together and find a space. I think there's all kinds of reasons for that. But I'm disappointed that the community has been unable to come together, find a space, a building that's not being used or property that's not being used, shelter people from the weather. And it's nice the last couple of weeks compared to what it's going to be in January and February. I wouldn't call it balmy. I wouldn't want to be sleeping outside in a tent, small or large, and trying to find food and trying to survive in the weather we've been through just the last few days. So I wouldn't say it's a small problem. I think it's a huge problem. I'm also disappointed that the city, in all of this time, from summertime to now, hasn't been able to find a way to use some piece of city property or facilities to provide a center for those 10 or 12 nights next year when it'll be impossible for people to survive outside, not to be comfortable. It's impossible to survive. Councillor Isaacson's coming up with a motion, and I hope that helps. But Thursday night, 2 days from now, is the last council meeting we're having until pretty much the end of January. If we're going to make a decision as a council, we have to do it tonight or Thursday night. And anything that's decided after that is not going to make any particular impact on the winter of 2026. Not going to happen. And I heard people saying that, they expected the new shelter on Duncan on Barnett Street to be open in December. I thought that was optimistic. I always wished it would be open and people would be able to shelter there and get emergency relief there. But, that's not the way things work. It always takes months and months longer to do all the crossing the T's and dotted the I's. I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to come up with a solution as a community and as a council in the meantime. And I encourage anybody who can try to imagine a way we could do something before it's too late to go ahead and do it.
Is there a balmy wind?
Councillor Isaacson, second time speaker.
So are you meaning Elliot?
Councillor Elliott. I'm getting these two councillors mixed up all night. Sorry about that.
I absolutely don't mind being mistaken for Councillor Isaacson. She's a wonderful human being. So I have a couple of questions. I think we all know that this is a very bad situation, and activating city spaces for a warming shelter, like procedurally, what does that look like? And through local contractors, who pays those local contractors, and how do we get there fast? I guess my question is, like let's suppose council decides that when Dwight Hall's not being used for something else, we wouldn't mind using it for an emergency shelter during a snowstorm or whatever the criteria is. How would we activate that? Who pays for it, and how does that go? I think that matters to any potential motion that we might have. And then I also have a question for, I see Kim here, but I'll.
Sure. Through the chair to Councillor Elliott, I think I'd start by just distinguishing between a warming center and an extreme weather shelter, and just because they are funded separately. One is funded through the province through the Emergency Management Disaster Act, and the other is funded through BC Housing. So it really depends on what you're talking about. What was in operation last winter was a warming center, and that was not a place where people go to sleep. And so there's the distinction. What's being operated right now at Duncan by the coalition is essentially a warming center. It's not big enough for people to sleep. Making sure that everyone understands the city has granted a license of occupation to the coalition to operate a warming center. Just making sure that everybody catches that. Your second question, like how quickly? I think we would probably look to our senior level of staff to once we have direction from council. There are certain reimbursable costs from the province if the city was to operate a warming center, and I'd need to spend a bit more time looking at what those are. I think they relate to staff time and other things, but they're not the full gamut of costs that might be spent. So there would be some cost to the city, and I think depending on what the direction that comes our way tonight, we would have to look at that and say, okay, are we operating a warming center? Are we going to be required to have, if it's a direct complex, the required staff? And one of the things that council should be aware of is that there's a requirement to have certain staff on site at the recreation complex that hold refrigeration tickets, because this is a facility that has ammonia and chlorine. So you've got very specific staff that are required to be there if it's going to be located at that spot. So again, those are costs that might not be borne by the province. They might be borne by the city. I think to answer your question realistically, I think we need to know what the direction is, and then we can regroup and talk about how quickly something, what the direction we receive, how quickly we can turn that around.
And then as part of that procedure, we always have the ability to call a special council meeting if it's outside our regular time. So it's not fair to say that nothing will happen to the new year. So for specifically an extreme weather shelter, which is open during certain weather conditions and includes the cots for people to sleep on, my question, I guess, through the chair is to LIFT, which I thought had the ability to activate that should there be a location in fairly quick order, and is part of an agreement they have with the province, or maybe I have that wrong. I can see Kim is here if she would mind. I don't know, through the chair, is that okay?
What is that?
The question to our LIFT manager over here.
Unusual.
It is, that's why I'm asking you.
Go ahead, ask your question.
My question is whether there's a standing sort of agreement with the province that allows you to be funded for that sort of thing.
We haven't been pre-approved for an emergency weather response shelter. So what that means is we're on a list of possible providers of emergency weather response shelters in BC. If we were to get a site, we actually have to submit for official approval based on that site with a site plan and a program plan. I don't have a clear sense of time frame of how long that would take. Although I do have a strong sense that BC Housing would work alongside us to try and push that through as soon as possible. The other challenge we would certainly face would be staffing. We don't have shelter staff that are available on call, so we would also have to begin recruitment of staff during a holiday season, which is not without its challenges. So, I would anticipate if we had a space tomorrow, it would be at least a month before we could stand up service, mostly because of recruitment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to make my motion and go from there. I'm going to say this slowly. It's all written out in hand rather than typed, so apologize. Okay. That the committee recommend to council to direct staff to activate city space to open a warming center or extreme weather response shelter, and if necessary, that staff amend the lease agreement for the bylaw building on Duncan. So last one, and that this motion be referred to council, to the council meeting on December 18th, 2025. So we don't need a second or a committee of the whole, and I'll speak to my rationale about this mouth.
Second, please,
Oh.
Councillor Isaacson. I want to know if staff got that motion. I see heads nodding. So.
Okay, so the rationale for this motion, it's meant to be a catch-all. It's meant to give staff the authority to move forward without necessarily having to check back in if it was passed at council. So I mentioned the site on Duncan Street. Obviously, any lease agreement amendments would have to be negotiated with the current leaseholder. I don't know if that will be possible. The site is only suitable for a warming center and only for like 10 people, but like, again, I don't know. I'm trying to catch all eventualities so that whatever staff have maybe what's needed to move forward. In saying this, I am very earnest that I mean any city space. If that means council chambers and we need to hold a meeting or two on a really cold night up in the boardroom, like I'm willing to do that. We're dealing with dates or nights in particular that there are particular emergencies. And so that only really would be an issue on Thursday nights every 2 weeks in February, January, February, March. Anyways, I know that this is not a part of staff recommendation. I'm happy to hear staff concerns about this because I know there will be some. I think the challenges with this are many. I think, me being here on council, I have, other than like last year, literally volunteering at the warming center. And to be clear, that was not an official warming center that was funded by the provincial government. That was completely a volunteer-led initiative. So other than like physically volunteering myself, the power that I have is as a member of council to propose motions and see if there is a will of council to move them forward. So like with my you know, the ethics that I carry about being responsible to humans in our community and dignity of human life. This is what I got. So that's how I got there. Thank you.
Motion, we don't need a seconder since it's a committee of the whole, so any discussion? Yeah, oh, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. One suggestion is that municipal staff are not trained to run warming centers or extreme weather, and the thought would be that any sort of recommendation should be for the city to partner with an organization who has the expertise to actually run the center, rather than have an expectation that municipal staff are actually doing the work, which we're not trained to do and would open up a whole bunch of problems. So I think that's just really key off the beginning to make some clarity around that. Once we get past that, we could talk about potential issues that we may have as a municipal workforce, but I just wanted to flag that one to start.
And since there's no seconder and the motion still is kind of with me, happy to add that activate city space in partnership with community partners.
Okay, so you've added that to your agenda or to your motion. Partnership with community members. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Councillor Palm.
Yes, thanks to the chair. So just to clarify the motion, first of all, the reference to ending the homeless situation on Duncan, what's the intent on that?
Through the chair, one of the city sites that exists is the bylaw building on Duncan Street that the Coalition to End Homelessness has a lease agreement with the city on. What I'm thinking of all the city spaces that perhaps could be activated as a warming center, if that is seen as, like, in staff's wisdom, if that is a possibility, I would like to have staff have the authority to negotiate that lease agreement. This doesn't say that the leaseholder would be amenable to those agreements, but if that's the angle that is most is the best to pursue, I want staff to be able to have that authority through a motion without them having to come back to us. And so this is like, in the eventuality if that becomes a question, I just want that to already be answered. That's my intention there.
Thank you for that clarification. Just to follow up then on the on part of the motion, you're looking at any possible space. You're not just referring to the chamber here.
No, I'm not only referring to the chamber here. Being said, though, the chamber to me makes one of the ones with more sense. But I am not aware of all the operational needs of each building, and I don't want to presuppose, that.
I'm going to throw one more option out for staff since we're talking about possibilities. That is, I understand, do we owners of the police station, or is that federally owned?
For the chair, I'm not. It's my understanding it's a city-owned building.
You don't have to answer that right now, but something to look into, because I understand there is a vacant large space, the northeast corner of that facility, and it has washrooms and it has access from the outside. That is something that, in terms of this motion, should be explored because it's central. And if it's big enough for 20 cots, that might be the answer. Thanks.
Anyone else on the motion? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't think we should let anyone freeze to death this winter, and they need a place to get out of the cold. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out here. I like the motion in that it's trying to do something. What I worry about is the risk analysis situation may require approval in order for staff to take that on outside of what their normal duties are. And so I just wanted to caution that if we're focusing on spaces, those with the least amount of risk attached to them are the better options. And so I don't know the risks affiliated with each space, but I can assume that we would have to be able to make sure that information that needs to be secure is secure. Places and spaces that have access to a broader spot are not requiring extreme amounts of money and effort to barricade them or what have you. And so some of the spaces that people are considering as great to stay out of the cold are also spaces that have access to security problems. I was kind of hoping for a little bit of a list of which spaces don't have such security problems that we own versus those that do. And I keep coming to mind with Dwight Hall because it's a recreational space. We lease it out. I don't know if there's offices in there. I don't know if it's easy to secure spaces that are not part of the main hall area or not, but it's generally open except for when booked. And you know, we have to have the heat on anyway to keep the building from deteriorating. And so it does seem like an easy place to activate. I'm not hearing, I hear that it's not central. Is there any other reason that it can't be used other than it being not central? Because I think if we have extreme weather and police and other emergency workers are trying to get people out of the cold and we had a space that was activated, they could get them there. But yeah, I'm just a little bit baffled as to why we're not coming up with ideas that could work rather than ideas that why it can't work. And so that I know I'm speaking to a particular motion. I'm in favor of the motion. I'm not sure if that actually gets us there. Thank you.
Any other first-time speakers? Councillor Isaacson.
Yeah, I think the challenge that we're in, kind of speaking to your question or comment, Councillor Elliott, is that we don't have a suitable space. You know, we don't have a community center like some other communities where we've got a clear, you know, room with 2 bathrooms and maybe a sink, and that's locked off to the rest of the building. Like, we just don't have a suitable space. And so, you know, we don't have a suitable space. We don't, we have community partners with low capacity or community partners that are not, for a variety of reasons, not interested in participating in this. And so in that situation, what's the best that we could do of all the bad options? And so I think we're in a situation of having to do what we can with what we've got. I do want to acknowledge that, like, doing this work is not the primary responsibility of a city. We're in a situation where it has come to us as a situation of last resort, and without a community-wide plan for this, this is what we're faced with. And so I want to acknowledge, like, this is not ideal. This is not this is not ideal, and there's no good solution. And so what is the best solution of the worst, the best of the solutions we've got? And so my intention here is to you know, give staff a heads up if this goes to council, that we're interested in them pursuing the best of the bad options that we've got. Not bad options, but like the best of the less than ideal options that we've got.
Through the chair, there's been a fair bit of conversation on what some of the general pros and cons are, and our CAO had indicated we could maybe dive down into some of the specific challenges and opportunities by building. I can definitely offer what some of those challenges and opportunities are for a couple of our buildings, if that interests you. Seeing some nodding. So through the chair, I'll I'll start with the recreation complex. We don't think the recreation complex would be an ideal situation for this. In 2023, we did receive parts of a report that the QRD sponsored to look at some of the buildings across the region. One of ours was looked at, which was the rec complex by Red Cross, as far as it being possible for congregate shelter. The report indicated that we have 4 rooms in the complex that could accommodate that if needed. The Elm Room, and which some of you may know has the yoga room upstairs, is one of those 4 rooms. It can contain 8 cots. The Cedar Room, which was the COVID clinic for a while back, that is another room that could contain 15 cots. The Arbutus Room would be another one. That's 30 cots, and then their highest recommendations were the ice surfaces during the summer months, obviously. For us, at this period of time, the Arbutus Room is also a no-go because of the theater seating that is malfunctioned and is out. So we've got the Elm Room and the Cedar Room. If we were to attempt to become an emergency shelter, we would have a few key challenges, some more easily overcome than others. The first one, obviously, is program impacts. Our approach would simply be to cancel the programming for the duration of the estimated time that this would occur overall. We would not, because of staff capacity, we would not, and it's not necessarily a cost factor, it's just the ability to get staff in. We work with 1 janitor on a time, and it's even difficult to schedule that. We would not be trying to open up and close up and fully clean and that room back and forth through the days for the public. So the easiest thing for this to be a shelter would be to close it to programming for the duration of the cold weather impact. The second would be the controlled access. Easily controlled access to the outside from there through one of our side doors. If it goes out onto sort of a platform, some of you may note that. More difficulty would be controlled access to the washrooms. That would require additional staffing from our side or staffing from our partner's side, consistent throughout that duration in our upper foyer to prevent anyone coming in or out of uncontrolled areas of the complex at that time. Security would be a third challenge for us. We would likely want more stationary security on the complex during times where it's being used overnight for sleeping. Right now, our security budget is maxed out at with the roving patrols. We don't have any stationary security in the city. We don't have any contracts for that, and we certainly don't have any staff that are able to do that. There is a request for wherever this is to store the cots on site, and believe it or not, we do not have storage capacity at the complex. That may be hard to believe. We did ourselves have 25, I believe, cots for some overnight programs for kids in the summer on the ice rinks, and we had to get rid of them because we had no storage facility at the complex. We've got waiting lists for user groups for storage, and it's and ourselves, we're making decisions on bringing materials in based on whether or not we can store them. The most significant, though, the one that's a little bit more challenging to overcome, is we are legislatively required when anyone is ever in the complex to have it staffed by someone with a refrigeration safety awareness ticket or higher. As I mentioned, we do run on minimums. Our minimums mean that there are many times when we only have 1 janitor on site and sometimes 2 janitors on site, rarely ever more than that. During our regular times, it's a challenge, an ongoing challenge to try to make sure that we are covering our operating hours. For us to cover these shifts, it would definitely be a short-term call out, likely overtime. Yes, the cost would probably be approximately $1,000 a day for 2 people with our RSA for those overnight hours. But my main concern is I don't know whether I'd be able to guarantee to have anyone on those overtime call out shifts. That would be the main one with the rec complex. You also referred to Dwight Hall, wide open facility. If the Dwight Hall was located right beside the complex, it probably would be easier and something we could do. One of my concerns with Dwight Hall, we just want to make sure that we would have enough security and maintenance on site, primarily due to how the age of the building and some of the janitorial requirements, special janitorial requirements that we have in that building. We haven't thought through what the staffing would be, but it would be easier than the complex for sure.
We have the motion on the screen. Councillor Southcott, you're next.
Okay, I could support this motion, but also because I see the term city space as not precluding real estate where a tent could be put up, if heating could be provided safely within a tent. Reflecting on what was provided last year, I also volunteered in the, if you will, pop-up EWS, I guess it was, space in a larger unused room above the library. And it very well may be that there are other volunteers who would be capable of doing it. My background did include skills that might have been, but fortunately weren't necessary during that time. But that's kind of a hope. I don't even know for sure if a tent would work. I suppose that would depend on if it would be feasible from a fire safety standpoint. And I don't know what else, but I'm sure that porta potties could be employed as well. Anyway, it certainly, to me, represents to myself a certain desperation, really. So lacking anything better, I will support this motion.
Councillor Palm.
Yeah, so I support this motion coming forward on Thursday evening for further discussion, but I'm just going to throw out another couple of possibilities here before we get to Thursday night, and that is, I've mentioned the RCMP room.
Yeah.
The French school is also another possibility that's vacant during the evening. And then as a last resort, we have the little building up by the yard run by the coalition. And to get people out of the cold or extreme weather, since I believe you have washrooms up there, a bus, you have one, but you could use a bus just to get people out of the extreme, warm them up. At least that would get them out of the elements.
Anyone else like to speak on the motion? You want to speak on the motion again, Councillor Isaacson?
I would, please, very quickly. I realize that, yeah, we're dealing with options that are all less than ideal. My request would be that I'm happy to talk to people before Thursday if we do make this motion to consider amendments to this for next Thursday or for Thursday. But it is, my deep yearning is that people are willing to explore options, even if they're less than ideal. Thank you.
Any other favor of the motion? All those opposed? Or unanimously?